So, taking a step back and just give our listeners some perspective, I've been a Fool for 2 years now, and one of the first major stories that Mark Reith and I used to cover when we did a consumer goods-based show back in the day was JCPenney. This is when they were in some serious trouble. This was late 2013, early 2014. I mean, it was like, are they going to survive the holidays? Actually, that Christmas 2013, they had to issue a bunch of stock for cash in order to have cash for inventory purchases and stuff for the holidays. I mean, it was getting tight.
Very dire straits, I'm sure.
And so, of course, they announced a bunch of store closures. I mean, they were going to close, I think, 92, give or take 2 or 3 stores, in 2014. And but the interesting story of the last few years, and the two, bringing it back around, the two major stories that we've seen with department stores is not only has JCPenney, the most troubled department store, been closing stores, but the strongest player here, arguably Macy's, has been closing stores too. Everybody's been trying new store concepts. So what's been going on with these 4 department stores in light of these facts?
Sure. So, like you mentioned, the store closing for JCPenney, especially during that when they're still on the downward run, essentially was really bad. The past year, they announced they'll be closing about 40 locations in its weaker the weaker stores, pretty much.
Well, and this was the joke again, harkening back to 2 years ago. So good luck finding that on YouTube. But it was like, I remember I lived in Indianapolis for a time, and they were closing a JCPenney store in some farm town in Indiana, like 2 hours, and I was like, why was this ever here in the first place? But anyway.
Well, actually, the interesting thing is, some of the steps that they're taking, that these stores are taking, that we'll talk about in a few minutes here, kind of addresses the potential that they see in smaller markets.
Right.
So JCPenney closing 40 stores, I'm sure they're going to end up closing more too as these leases expire. They're going to look at which locations are performing well, not performing well. And obviously, I think overall that's
keep the major
just part of their turnaround.
Yeah.
For Macy's, they also announced they'd be closing about 35 to 40 underperforming locations. And the big thing here is they actually mentioned that though they're closing, that represents about 5% of their total store base. It only represents about 1%.
Yeah, just under 1,000.
1% of their revenue. So that gives you an idea of how poorly.
Automatic win.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So again, I think the stocks actually traded down a little bit on the Macy's news, but overall, investors should really keep in mind that this is basically the management team cleaning house here, and trying to shore up their operations into their strongest stores, which makes perfect sense to me. Overall, with those store closings that we just discussed, that is also shifting with some openings too. But the thing is, they're not opening their typical anchor stores at malls. They're shifting to a lot, and this is a trend that we're going to see among many of the bigger retailers towards these off-price, more discount-based pricing and smaller footprint stores. So Macy's announced they're going to have their backstage. It's Macy's Backstage. And then we also have Nordstrom Rack off 5th by Saks Fifth Avenue.
Hugely successful Nordstrom Rack.
And also Neiman Marcus Last Call. Kohl's is also doing...
Is that a bar? Okay.
So Kohl's is also doing something similar. And, the main theme here is smaller footprint. And what that means is, again, they can avoid the shopping malls, which a lot of which are struggling overall unless you're in like the top tier of targeting the top tier of wealthier customers and shoppers. And so that, they can basically target urban areas where they can have a smaller store can fit basically in the general spaces that are available in those kinds of areas. But they also target smaller markets where, okay, we don't have to open this massive store. We can open something maybe 50% the size, and that can be sustained by a smaller city or town, for example, that you mentioned, like that small one in Indiana. So this is a big push from them, and in general, the retail sector is seeing a trend for shoppers who are looking for value offerings. So companies like TJX and Kohl's, Kohl's
that have not been struggling.
They have not been closing locations. Though they've had a few rougher quarters as well. That has been.
Well, I was actually referring to Ross and TJ Maxx. Those stores are killing it. I mean, they've had a great 5-6 years. The other thing that I wanted to add some color on was the smaller format store within a store concepts that these guys have been doing. And we can obviously talk about this a little bit later and everything, but they're trying to make the best use possible of their giant stores that remain by having the store within a store. That way you have a reason to go in there. And the best example of this is JCPenney's relationship with Sephora.
Yes.
Their former chairman and CEO actually got his start at the owner of Sephora, which is what is it? The French company.
I do not recall.
Anyway, yeah. But the owner of Sephora, they have this relationship with JCPenney, and that's why the Sephora, and that's regularly highlighted in JCPenney's quarterly conference calls, like our Sephora store within a store concept.
Well, yeah, that's drawing the customers in through the door, and guess what? When they're there, they're going to do other shopping in other departments, and that's been a huge boon for them.
The evil scheme.
So, going back to the some of the smaller kind of discount store concepts that these retailers are launching into, this is something that's leaked through to a lot of the retail sector. So, for example, Walmart, Target doing the same thing.
Right.
They're trying to open smaller locations in the cities to attract what everybody wants to attract: millennial, younger shoppers, who are looking for good value and more discount merchandise. And again, this also applies to Whole Foods. They have their 365 concept,
which I can't wait to visit,
which they're experimenting with now. And the whole point of that is that it's the Whole Foods 365 brand, so lower prices to again appeal to younger shoppers and people who are in these urban areas where they can't potentially launch a full size Whole Foods in every city.